Highnesses, heads of delegations, may the mercy and blessings of God be upon you. I speak to you today after almost 2 years in which our Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip have been facing a war of genocide, destruction, starvation, and displacement waged by the Israeli occupation forces, in which they killed and injured more than 220,000 Palestinians, the majority of whom are unarmed children, women, and the elderly. A war in which they displaced hundreds of thousands and prevented the entry of food and medical supplies and caused the starvation of 2 million Palestinians. They imposed a stifling siege on an entire people and destroyed more than 80% of homes, schools, hospitals, churches, mosques, facilities, and infrastructure. What Israel is carrying out is not merely an aggression. It is a war crime and a crime against humanity that is both documented and monitored, and it will be recorded in history books and the pages of international conscience as one of the most horrific chapters of humanitarian tragedy in the 20th and 21st centuries. In the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the capital of the State of Palestine, the extremist Israeli government continues to implement its settlement policies through illegal settlement expansion and developing projects for annexing settlements. The latest was the construction plan for E1, which would divide the West Bank into 2 parts and would isolate occupied Jerusalem from its surroundings and would undermine the option of the two-state solution in a blatant violation of international law and relevant Security Council resolutions, specifically Resolution 2334. Furthermore, the Israeli Prime Minister announced a plan for what he calls Greater Israel, which we reject and completely deplore, and which involves expanding into sovereign Arab states. In addition to the brutal attack against the sisterly state of Qatar, which we condemn and see as an escalation that is grave and a blatant violation of international law, which requires a decisive intervention and deterring procedures and measures for such expansionary plans. With official support and through increasing facilities, the terrorism of settlers increases. They burn homes and fields, they uproot trees and attack villages and attack unarmed Palestinian civilians. In fact, they kill them in broad daylight under the protection of the Israeli occupation army. Furthermore, the Islamic and Christian religious sites in Jerusalem, Hebron, and Gaza Strip have not been spared the attacks which have damaged the mosques, churches, and cemeteries in a blatant violation of the historic status quo and in a clear violation of the provisions of the international law. Despite all what our people have suffered, we reject what Hamas carried out on the 7th of October. These actions that targeted Israeli civilians and took them hostages, because these actions do not represent the Palestinian people, nor do they represent their just struggle for freedom and independence. We have affirmed, and we will continue to affirm, that the Gaza Strip is an integral part of the State of Palestine, and that we are ready to bear full responsibility for governance and security there. Hamas will not have a role to play in governance. Hamas and other factions will have to hand over their weapons to the Palestinian National Authority as part of a process to build the institutions of one state, one law, and one legal security forces. We reiterate that we do not want an armed state. Ladies and gentlemen, our wounds are deep and our calamity is great. 7 million Palestinians are still living the tragedies of the Nakba and displacement since 1948. Our people in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and in the Gaza Strip, are still living the tragedies of the Israeli aggression and occupation for decades. Years that our people have spent under occupation, killing, arrests, and settlement, and the theft of money, property, and lands. And this still continues without any deterrent or accountability. Years of oppression, deprivation, and the protection for the occupier, and enabling the occupier instead of protecting the people under the occupation, and more violations of the rights of our Palestinian people to self-determination, to freedom, dignity, independence, and sovereignty on the land of the occupied state, on the land of the State of Palestine occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem. More than 1,000 resolutions at the United Nations, not one of them was implemented. There have been many efforts, many international initiatives, without reaching an end to this tragic situation that the Palestinian people are living under the yoke of occupation. In 1993, we signed the Oslo Accords, and we adhered to all its items, and we recognized the State of Israel. Israel, at the time, recognized the Palestine Liberation Organization as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. Based on that, we restructured our institutions, and we amended our national charter, and we rejected violence and terrorism, and we adopted a culture of peace. We made all our efforts to build the institutions of a modern Palestinian state that lives side by side in peace and security with Israel. But Israel did not adhere to the signed agreements and has worked systematically on undermining them. Ladies and gentlemen, just 3 days ago, we met at a high-level international conference in New York under the joint chairmanship of France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with wide-scale international presence and united positions that expressed a genuine international will to put an end to this historic conflict by recognizing the State of Palestine, ending the occupation, and returning hope to both the Palestinian and Israeli people. And here I would like to, on behalf of the Palestinian people, to express our gratitude and appreciation to all the states that recently recognized the State of Palestine and those that intend to recognize the State of Palestine soon. We urge all the states that have not done so yet to recognize the State of Palestine. We call on supporting Palestine obtaining full membership in the United Nations. It should be noted that we have already recognized Israel's right to exist in 1988 and in 1993, and we still recognize this right. In this regard, we would like to thank France, the UK, Canada, Australia, Belgium, Portugal, Luxembourg, Malta, Monaco, San Marino, Andorra, and Denmark for their recognition of the State of Palestine. We would like to thank all 149 states which had previously recognized the State of Palestine. Our people will not forget this noble position. We would also like to commend the role of the chairmanship of this conference, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and France, and also the United Kingdom. We would also like to thank all the states that headed the various working groups and those which participated and continue to participate in the International Alliance for Peace. We would also like to thank the states that are supporting our efforts to stop the genocide and the occupation and achieve peace. We highly appreciate all the peoples and organizations around the world who protested in support of the rights of the Palestinian people to freedom and independence and to stop the war, destruction, and starvation. We reject confusing the solidarity with the Palestinian cause and the issue of anti-Semitism, which is something that we reject based on our values and principles. Within the framework of welcoming the outcomes of the International Conference for Peace, we reiterate today before the General Assembly the following points. First, the need for an immediate and permanent end to the war in Gaza. Second, the entry without conditions of humanitarian aid through United Nations organizations, including the UNRWA, and to stop using starvation as a weapon. And here we would like to thank the brotherly and friendly states and organizations that have been sending aids. Third, the release of all hostages and prisoners on both sides. Fourth, the complete withdrawal of the occupation from the Gaza Strip and the rejection of the plans for displacement and putting an end to settlement, the terrorism of settlers, and the theft of Palestinian lands and property under the headline of annexation, and stopping the aggression against the status quo in holy sites. These are all unilateral actions that undermine the two-state solution in Gaza, the West Bank, and Jerusalem. Fifth, the State of Palestine should take their full responsibility, starting with the Administrative Committee for the Gaza Strip, which is chaired by a minister in the Palestinian government, to manage the affairs of the Gaza Strip for a temporary period, and then to connect that with the West Bank, all through Arab and international support and with Arab and international presence to protect civilians in Gaza and support the Palestinian forces under the umbrella of the United Nations rather than being a replacement. Sixth, to guarantee that the residents of the Gaza Strip remain on their lands without displacement, and to implement a recovery and reconstruction plan in both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Seventh, releasing the Palestinian tax money that is being held by the State of Israel unjustly, and lifting the economic siege and the barriers from the Palestinian cities, villages, and refugee camps. Eighth, supporting our national efforts towards reform and conducting presidential and parliamentary elections within a year after the end of the war. The practical procedures has begun A committee has been assigned to draft a temporary constitution, and it will end its work within 3 months, so that we move from authority to state. We want a modern and democratic state that abides by international law, the rule of law, and multilateralism, and the peaceful transition of power. And we are extremely keen to empower women and the youth. Ninth, we declare that we are ready to work with U.S. President Donald Trump and with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and France, the United Nations and all partners to implement the peace plan that was approved in the conference that was held on the 22nd of September in a way that would lead towards a just peace and regional cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, today we say clearly, peace cannot be achieved if justice is not achieved, and there can be no justice if Palestine is not freed. We want to live in freedom, security and peace like all other people on earth, in an independent, sovereign state on the borders of 1967, with East Jerusalem as our capital, in security and peace with our neighbors. We want a modern civilian state that is free of violence, weapons, and extremism, one that respects law, human rights, and invests in people, development, technology, and education, not in wars and conflict. The time has come for the international community to do right by the Palestinian people so that they may obtain their legitimate rights to be rid of the occupation and to not remain a hostage to the temperament of Israeli politics, which denies our rights and continue in their injustice, oppression, and aggression. We are continuing to move forward, and we will continue our peaceful, legal, and diplomatic fight to obtain our rights. In conclusion, we say to our sons and daughters in the homeland, in the exile, and in the diaspora, no matter how much our wounds bleed, and no matter how long the suffering lasts, it will not break our will to live and survive. The dawn of freedom will emerge, and the flag of Palestine will fly high in our skies as a symbol of dignity, steadfastness, and being free from the yoke of occupation. Palestine is ours. Jerusalem is the jewel of our heart and our eternal capital. We will not leave our homeland. We will not leave our lands. Our people will remain rooted like the olive trees, firm as the rocks. We will rise from under the rubble to rebuild and to send from our blessed and holy land the messages of hope and the sound of truth and right, and build the bridges of just peace for the people of our region and the entire world. May the peace and mercy and blessings of God be upon you.
That was the breaking developments of Mahmoud Abbas addressing the United Nations General Assembly. He was doing so from the presidential palace in Ramallah in the West Bank. That is the audience signalling their applause in the UNGA in New York. He wasn't allowed to travel to New York by the Trump administration, and no delegates from the Palestinian authorities were given visas to travel aside from those already in New York. Let's bring in our correspondents. Firstly, our Middle East correspondent Adam Parsons is in Jerusalem, and also our US correspondent Mark Stone, who joins us as well. Adam, first to you, your reaction to what we've just been hearing.
Yeah, I think Mahmoud Abbas was continuing, in a sense, from where he left off a couple of days ago. This was a speech, in a sense, on the one hand, conciliatory, saying that that he wanted there to be a state of Palestine that could coexist with the state of Israel. He went to pains to say that the Palestinians had accepted the right of Israel to exist. He said he'd done that in 1988 and then again in 1993. He said that anti-Semitism was rejected by him. He said it was against the values of Palestine. But he was also at the same time hugely critical, as you would imagine, of the conduct of Israel. He described the war in Gaza as a genocide, as destructive, as having cost the lives of so many women and children, as well, of course, of men in Gaza. Said that the number of dead and injured was well above 200,000. There are those who actually think that that is an underestimate. And he thanked the nations who had come out to recognise the state of Palestine, not least the UK, as well as France, Canada, Australia. He listed all of them, including the much smaller nations, and called on those who have not yet recognised the state of Palestine to do so. And then pointedly, I thought, made a point of saying that he looked forward to working with President Donald Trump, as well as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, very respectful in those terms, France, and any other partners at the United Nations to pursue a path to peace. And then right at the end, you heard Mahmoud Abbas laying out this vision of Palestine and Gaza, and talking about reconstructing and rebuilding these countries, not around war, but around technology and peace. So this was a powerful speech. As I said, it was a conciliatory one. But I think a few things that you look around it. Number one, he was delivering the speech from Ramallah, not from New York, because the United States declined to give him a visa. There's no way you could look at that as anything other than a snub. Israel continues to believe that the fact that countries have recognised the state of Palestine is, in their repeated expression, a reward for terrorism. The fact that Mahmoud Abbas said yet again that Hamas will play no part in the future of Gaza is something that Israel will consider merely to be rhetoric. And I think a final complication, a final sign of just how complex this region is that in the minutes running up to this address, as Mahmoud Abbas's speech was simply being finished off, Israel was attacking targets in Yemen, dozens of Israeli fighter jets launching a huge barrage against targets there. The Houthis launched a drone into Eilat yesterday and have received the response that they probably expected. Israel is launching attacks against a whole variety of targets at the moment. But the principal target is, of course, Gaza. And as Mahmoud Abbas was talking about this potential of living in peace, the Israeli army is continuing its ground offensive in Gaza City. I think when we hear from Benjamin Netanyahu tomorrow, we're going to hear a very, very different version of what is happening in this region.
Adam Parsons in Jerusalem, thank you. Let's bring in Mark Stone, who's in New York for us. And Mark, that reference there from Mahmoud Abbas saying he was looking forward to working with the Trump administration, but as Adam notes, it's any chance of doing so is coming from a very low point of relations with the White House. What will they have made, do you think, of the words they've just heard for the past 20 minutes or so?
Well, the first thing to say is I was struck that Mahmoud Abbas chose not in any way to criticise the American president. He could have chosen to criticise the fact that the Americans blocked the visas, so no one from the Palestinian delegation could be here in New York. He decided not to. He could have criticised the Americans for what appears to be open-ended support for Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israelis. He chose not to. I think that is very, very telling. He knows that it is absolutely not in the Palestinian interest right now to in any way criticise the American administration, and so he didn't. Indeed, he said, as Adam said, that he's looking forward to being able to work with Donald Trump. He name-checked Mr. Trump, looking forward to working with him and the Saudis and others in order to pursue peace. Look, I've listened to countless speeches over the years by Mahmoud Abbas. Frankly, they are always pretty hard to listen to. They are dense, They are complicated. He gets into the weeds. I did not think he did that this time. The 89-year-old man, 89, yes he is, and he's still serving since 2008, I think, as the Palestinian president, with no elections for a long time. Not a popular man. This speech was different, though. I felt he clearly he and his advisors needed to be seen to hit several buttons, because it's not often that the Palestinian Authority president gets the limelight, has this moment to make his point. There's been so much noise over the past, 800 days of this war, where it's Hamas down in Gaza who people focus on. It's the Israelis in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv that people focus on. They don't focus necessarily on the West Bank. And so this was a moment where he was able to do what he's done before and to condemn the October the 7th attacks. We reject all the actions of Hamas, he said. They do not represent the actions of the Palestinian people or their struggle for independence. He then talked about a future beyond the conflict in Gaza. We, the Palestinian people, will bear full responsibility. Hamas, he said, will not. And then, interestingly, he said, we do not want to be an armed state. I think that's very interesting. There are some who say that the Palestinians, when they have an actual proper state, if their two-state solution ever comes to pass, that they should be allowed to be an armed state. Well, he seems to be suggesting not the case. We reject anti-Semitism, he said. So this was a speech where he attempted to hit lots of buttons, as I said, his moment to separate himself from the terrorism of Hamas, to present himself as a statesman and to present the Palestinian Authority as a key partner to Israel in the future if a two-state solution can be viable. But what he also pointed out is that every day, every minute of every day, the Israelis are undermining the prospects of a two-state solution by their actions, not just in Gaza, but more specifically in the West Bank, where they are continuing to basically annex in all but name.
Mark, what will this mean, though, in real terms for the United Nations General Assembly? You know, Mahmoud Abbas not present, warm words towards the Trump administration, a fair bit of support for Saudi Arabia and for France and the United Kingdom. But in reality, there is such a long way to go with this. You know, will it really move any needles with any degree of significance?
Well, the speech won't necessarily, but I do think that there is movement at the United Nations. And you say such a long way to go. Yes, you're right, but also it could be quite quick. I mean, if the American administration, if Donald Trump was to tell Netanyahu, stop, enough, we've got to go for this peace plan that is being proposed. We've got to accept the offer from Hamas to release some of the hostages, not all of the hostages, and do it bit by bit. Then maybe there is scope for a kind of a path. But the Americans are not willing to do that at the moment. What I do think is interesting is that Steve Witkoff, who's Donald Trump's Middle East envoy, said yesterday, last night here in New York, we're hopeful, and I might even say confident, that in the coming days we will be able to announce some sort of breakthrough. Now, those words come after discussions that took place between the Americans and Gulf Arab countries and some other Muslim nations like Indonesia, all of whom have said they are now on the same page about trying to find an end to the bloodshed in Gaza, and that could involve Middle Eastern troops on the ground, peacekeepers in Gaza. Indonesia has said they may be willing to do that, so that is really interesting. It could involve money to rebuild Gaza from wealthy Middle Eastern countries. So look, I've said this, we've all said this so many times before, that maybe a breakthrough is close. But once again, it does feel like maybe it could be. Monday's a key day, Netanyahu at the White House.